Good morning, everyone. My name is Amber Gunst. I'm the CEO of Austin Technology Council, and we're thrilled to have you join us today. We are very fortunate to have Michael Hannan with LightEdge leading our conversation. Michael, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Amber. All right, I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully everyone will be able to see that. All right. Well, good morning, and thank you guys for joining. Not sure if anyone's familiar with LightEdge, so I wanted to give you just a quick overview on our company and myself, just to give you a little bit of background and a little bit of flavor into how we've been dealing with things. So it's always good as we've been having conversations with partners, customers, just people around us. It's really good to gauge how large an organization is, what position a person's in, what state or region they're in, because all these are different things to how people are responding. There's some commonalities between them, but there's some very big differences between. So I'm our Chief Security Officer at LightEdge. I oversee our security function, our compliance function, and corporate IT as well. LightEdge itself has about 200 employees or users across 10 physical locations in 5 different states. And LightEdge focuses on providing co-location cloud services to highly regulated industries. So those in financial institutions, those in healthcare. So a lot of our customers right now are some of the entities and individuals that are working really, really hard as first responders. They're those that have critical infrastructure through this time. So as a company, we're really focusing on our customers and our partners to ensure that our services are up and running. So that's a little bit of background on what we've got going on. And today we're going to just talk about how we hold it together, how we keep employees safe, how we keep our company safe, how we keep our employees motivated. They're very different things. And this presentation has morphed a little bit as we continue to go through this. And hopefully if anyone has questions, comments, those, continue to submit those. I know we'll have a Q&A at the end. And that's the part of my job that I really enjoy is, sitting down with our customers that we've really been doing and hearing their stories of how they're impacted, how we can help, how we can introduce them to people who can help. It's amazing to see companies and people come together during this time. And that's no different for all of our employees. Everyone has really seen the need that's going on right now and has doubled down on all their efforts to ensure that we're offering just an amazing service at this point in time. So thank you all for being on here. And again, if you have questions, feel free to submit them and we can talk about them at the end. So just a few questions that, at different points, these are ones we like to kind of check back on ourselves. They were things that we asked ourselves in February. They're things that we continually on our weekly business continuity meetings with our executive team and our emergency response team. We continue to ask these questions to gauge how our employees are doing, how our customers are doing, those different types of things. So one of the early questions was, do employees have adequate connectivity at home? Luckily, we're seeing broadband usage finally level off. So this is one where things are not returning to normal necessarily, but they're leveling off, which is a good thing. So life can finally resume in the new normal that we're in. We early on asked ourselves personal hotspots on their phones. We pay for employees' phones here at LightEdge. And so educating our users on the hotspot connectivity through their iPhones, through their Android devices, has been really important. If there's outages locally or intermittent connectivity, they can switch over to their hotspots. And that's been really important for several key meetings with customers, boards, those types of things where we've had to use that as a backup. So educating our users and then facilitating our employees to have as close to normal working conditions to the office as they can. So we've done a really good job. We've continued to try and do a good job of sending home whatever they need, whether that's a second or an iPad as a second monitor, sending home a second or a third monitor, keyboards, facilitating office chairs, all those different types of things. We want our employees to feel as comfortable as possible at home. So bending over backward as much as possible to facilitate that has been really important. Now more than ever from the security front, now that the users aren't necessarily within the corporate domain or the network itself, running security patches and updates is incredibly important. And not only that, but the reporting piece of it and knowing where your user base is has been very, very important for us. So we've got our pulse on where those updates sit, where user devices are sitting from a patching and updating standpoint, and making sure we're staying up to date on that because that's critical at this point. We were lucky that we had a pretty strong rollout of multi-factor authentication across most of our platforms. That has been a place where we're seeing a lot of assistance with our customers, and that may be one where we have some questions today. That's the biggest single thing that we're preaching to get our customers, partners safe on this front. Anybody who's working at home, if possible, having multi-factor or MFA turned up on your VPN connections, on critical systems, infrastructure applications, those different types of things. And then tying to that is everyone using a VPN or a virtual private network. Many of our users who had only done work in the office kind of knew this existed, but had never connected. So ensuring that our help desk was there to assist them with not only these common work scenarios, but the out-of-the-box assistance of setting up new mesh wireless networks at home, helping with setting up additional monitors, those different types of things, ensuring that our help desk does everything that they can to ensure everybody is working from home in a safe and secure manner. And again, if we have questions on MFA, that's the single biggest thing we're trying to push right now to make sure everyone is as secure as they can be. So we're going to take a step back. Those are just some of the questions and the metrics that we continue to check ourselves on how our projects are coming, how our employees are doing. So we're going to kind of break this down into a few different sections and start at the beginning here. So is the home office as secure as the office? Absolutely not. We had attempted over the past couple years to educate our user base, whether that was traveling and working from a hotel or a coffee shop or from home. We've tried to educate our user base on that, and that's a slow one to do. Not everyone takes those, once they come into the four walls of the office and see the security function and the compliance focus of the office, it's tough to take that home and apply those things to what they're doing, especially in these scenarios right now. So we've been providing our users as many tips, tricks, assistance, wherever possible to lock down those networks. So there's just many new threats to be aware of. The Wi-Fi vulnerabilities. This is one where we've been doing some one-off assessments of our employees' Wi-Fi networks. We'll sit down with them for a few minutes and have them pull up the console for that. There's some, many different things that you can do, especially with the IoT devices. So if you have Roku or Apple TVs or Nest devices or Ring, potentially moving those to a separate guest network or a network, dedicated to those things and segmenting off your own connection for work into its own little bucket there is something that little steps like that to help reduce the traffic, reduce the different devices that are on the network that you're working on can help reduce those vulnerabilities. The big one that we're seeing here, unfortunately, is the COVID-19 phishing scams. So on a given basis, you have people that are always trying to exploit or take advantage of a heightened sense or different things that are going on around the world. Now is no different. So you have these bad actors that are attempting to do email phishing, social engineering at this point in time, and having our work bases out of the office is a huge threat. That human element piece is where we are putting as much focus as we can. And we're trying to do that for our customers as well, because as you see, these trends continue to go up of these email phishing, who are looking legitimate as a CEO email or looking legitimate as a CDC website or email, those types of things. Having your workforce stay diligent on watching out for those email phishing. Now, there's two pieces to this. There's the technical defenses. So we're continuing our back-end team trying to flag these items, block and blacklist these items so that they're not making it to our users. But the other piece is we can't block 100% of these scenarios. So educating our users on a regular basis of the different scenarios and emails, links that they could be going on, whether or not you're in a Zoom conference and clicking on something, educating our user base to protect themselves is, our biggest threat right now. People are inherently trusting. So if something looks like it came from one of our emergency response team members and it's a CDC link or something like that, protecting them from clicking on it, being diligent to review and hover over the link, make sure it's something that's appropriate. If they were invited to a meeting and we're sent, a Zoom link, those types of things, double checking and only downloading Zoom from the app store it came from, whether it's on their phone or the website. If there's a chat going on in one of the video conferences that they're on, is being hesitant to click on any links or any attachments in there. We're seeing a lot of malware and things come through those. So just having users be extra diligent, extra cautious at this point in time is incredibly important. We've kind of talked about that. The more room for human error, you just have people who are working on different schedules with additional tension, whether that's work or personal related. Those different types of things cause, a heightened chance that there's human error. And so that's something we're trying to reduce via these other methods, via, proper compliance controls around change control and other things, trying to limit or reduce or mitigate the issue for human error. And then just with our working conditions right now, less privacy is obviously an issue, whether it's a family member or, a roommate, those different types of things. There's a lot more people around us that aren't necessarily part of our organization. So ensuring that you have privacy when you're talking about certain issues is definitely really important. I just had to throw this in there. I'm sure, the happy hours and the business lunches that we had been so used to look completely different, as have mine, moving from an office the majority of the time in one of our locations to in working with a couple dogs and a 16-month-old has been a big change. So I'm sure this is different for everyone. And when you're talking about these things for your organization, it's definitely important to focus as we're looking at, resuming normal business, making sure you have a pulse on your employees to understand, what their daycare situations and those different types of things look like as schools aren't coming back for the rest of the year. Being cognizant of what your employees are going through and having that human element piece is incredibly important to how you handle the situations. So productivity is a big thing, and this is kind of an interesting area for me that I like to not only read on, but study how our user base is working. How we continue to assist from my team standpoint is making sure they know how to use the technology. So I've spoken a little bit on that as, making sure that they have redundant connections as much as possible, knowing how to dial into the different meetings, especially if they're presenting, dialing in early, figuring out that they know how to work the different technologies. We use Skype and Team internally. So making sure they know the pros and cons of each, know how to work them, and just accepting extra background noise is incredibly important at this point. But the risk of burnout is incredibly huge right now. I talked about, the business pressures, the personal pressures. We're all going through stuff right now. So having those regular touch points, those sanity checks, picking up the phone. We're trying to push all of our managers to have daily phone calls with all their employees or stand-up meetings in the morning or afternoon. And then building that daily schedule. We're really trying to push this to our employees. It's something that I've had to do because if you don't create, a routine for how you kick off work or end work in the day, you have a lot of bleeding of time of, work starts far earlier than it used to and it continues, right up until the point you're going to sleep. So creating those hard boundaries and edges on this is very important. But the thing we're seeing right now, and the Harvard Business Review has done a couple really good studies on this, and we're seeing this. So we have a project management office. We're seeing a huge uptick in projects moving along at a pace quicker than we've seen over the past couple of years. So people are focusing a lot more time. You have a lot less wasted time in the offices. And so people are putting a lot more time to projects, closing tickets, those different types of things. And that is great right now. So the focus right now is on tactical work. So the number of tickets, people are trying to close more. They've got more time to close them. They're spending more hours on approved project plans, those different types of things. But being aware of the downside of this is that you shift your workforce away from looking at the big picture or the problems. So they're really just focused on what's the next little thing, closing out these, metrics that they can see, they can get that, direct instant feedback. So we're really trying to give our teams and our employees time back to think about these big picture items and these problems so that, we're not just looking a week or two down the line. We're thinking 6 to 12 months of how do we continue to provide, a high level of service and continue to initiate or, change as we're moving forward. So that's been a really important thing for us. And there's some really cool studies out there that really support this. and how you can motivate and continue to not only give the time to focus on that tactical work, but also give people a few hours a week or more to focus on those big picture items, so that you've got a nice blend of, having an exceedingly, tactical work function, but still moving towards that big picture. An employee's motivation is not necessarily high when they're not presented an option of where to work. And there's been many studies on this as well. And the Harvard Business Review included this in a couple of their articles. But when employees aren't presented an option to work from home or work from the office, motivation tends to go down, and more now than ever. That's something we have to be aware of. And there's tools out there to help gauge this. LightEdge works with an AI tool that presents micro surveys a couple times a week, and also is kind of embedded in some of our chat and other things to keep a very high level picture of burnout for our employees, so that we can kind of, before it gets too far, provide some management assistance or direct assistance to those employees. So there's different things that you guys can do for each entity out there to ensure that you're supporting your employees, you're catching burnout and motivation issues early on, and giving employees time to experiment, solve problems if available. I know that's a luxury for an organization to be able to have time to do, but if you can, try and work that in, because that's a really important piece of it. So to the security and compliance piece of it, how do we keep our business and our data safe? How do we keep our customers, our partners, anyone we're dealing with? And this includes employee data as well. The big thing we're trying to do is, hopefully you are on a path that presents itself well to being secure and compliant. If that's the case, it's staying diligent on that, trusting your common sense to make the right decision. And so there's an education piece to it, and it's giving powers back to the employee to feel like they're educated enough and have the processes in place to trust their own common sense in this. Once you've done that, you've made the security function a little bit easier, and complexity is by all means the end to a secure environment. If you make it difficult for an employee to be secure and compliant, they're going to take the roundabout. They're going to take the easiest path forward. So making sure that your security and compliance function has as little complexity to it as possible while still staying relevant is very important. Unfortunately, this was a big one, and we've done a lot of tracking here, but always using your VPN. We have a large amount of our workforce who had done 99% of their working in the office. So as I mentioned earlier, didn't even know how to turn on VPN. So making sure that they don't only use VPN when they're accessing certain applications, but from the moment they log on in the morning, they're initiating a VPN session. We've done a lot of tracking on this with some, gentle pushes to users who we can tell, are working, but aren't initiating VPN sessions, pushing them just to, use those, educating them on why it's important. And we've seen a huge uptick in those over the last couple of weeks. I've talked about the next one already. So exercising caution when opening all emails. It's just that extra level of scrutiny right now. The reporting that we're seeing internally from the past month and a half in the increase in email phishing. They're very legitimate emails that look like they're coming from our CEO. They're legitimate emails that look like they're coming from our management team or some of our partners. Staying diligent on this is incredibly important, because the ransomware attacks and everything that continue to go on are going to be there. They're going to continue to increase. Those bad actors need money just as much as all of us. So they're going to continue to increase their attempts at this. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. Pushing users to utilize encryption where possible is always important, especially if you're dealing with a regulated industry or regulated information, making sure that they're not taking the easiest path forward on this, and that you're giving them easy tools to use when needing to send protected information utilizing encryption. And what we tell our entire user base, when in doubt, if you have any question on it, ping our security team. They're usually really quick, whether it's through chat or email, to get back to you on whether an email looks legitimate, how to send some data, how to connect to different things. Just ask questions. And our user base we've seen so far has done a really good job with that. So we're just trying to make sure that our users know they can ask questions if they feel like their common sense or their first gut instinct isn't necessarily to trust something. I'm sure everyone's seen at this point. So there are absolutely risks to video conferencing. The good thing is most of them are pretty easy to overcome. Thankfully, we have all this technology in place. We've helped some of our customers stand some of these things up, quicker than I think their project plan had initially dealt with. And so we've seen some stuff there, but you've all seen in the news the Zoom bombing and different things like that. There are some very easy key steps that each of these entities push out from best practice, whether it's setting up a meeting for the first time or setting out a new invite, making sure you have these best practices covered. And then as users, there's definitely things that we can do. The first time you're jumping on a third party's meeting that is using a different technology, make sure you're going directly to the manufacturer's website, downloading it there. If you're on your phone, only download through the app stores themselves, not necessarily clicking on the links that come through an email or a text, those different types of things, going directly to the source, searching for it there. If you're jumping on a larger meeting, make sure it has a password on it, even if it's one key that keeps people from guessing or attempting to get into these and Zoom bombing on you. If you have the installed app, like I said, follow the best practices. They usually have, a 1-pager or 2-pager on the different configurations. They're radio buttons you can turn on and off, and they'll make your meetings far more secure. And then just, as I mentioned before, watching what you're sharing in the chat feature. So not providing too much information. And then if you're also seeing links put out there or attachments put out there, being aware of what's being put out there and not necessarily clicking on them, being additionally aware on protecting yourself from those different types of things. One that we continue to throw in this presentation here, and depending on where you were from a maturity standpoint, you've either felt like, all the work that you had done over the past 5 to 10 years on a business continuity plan was well justified, or you've got some things to definitely work on after the fact. We're seeing across the board, this is not necessarily a typical disaster or business continuity issue. This was a very specific one. So we're trying to help companies. Not many companies are necessarily taking on this task now. They're trying to just get by with what they have, which is fine. At some point, you're going to want to circle up and look at what you've done. So whether or not that's, reviewing your business continuity plan as it is, or writing one from the ground up based on what you've done, but doing these different steps, just to give you a little bit of flavor of kind of how we got to where we are. So on March 3rd, we had a business continuity review meeting. And at that point, we identified that our plan needed some strengthening around the pandemic response. So we dusted off the old pandemic responses from the early 2000s, put those with each of our functional areas and had them adopt what a work from home setting for each of their groups would be and bring those back to the group. So we've been continually making changes to our business continuity plan. On March 9th, we enacted our business continuity plan, which got our emergency response team collecting data, meeting on a weekly basis. And then on March 13th, we had all employees working from home. And I'm sure those timelines look similar to what you guys have been through and what you guys have gone through at this point. So there's a few easy steps, and most organizations are going to look to address these once things return to normal or the new normal. And so these are just some easy steps to make sure you've got a little bit of coverage on the process and make sure that you're covered in what you're doing. But the first one is creating a business impact analysis, which is evaluating where interruption will occur, can occur, and how it can occur. So how long can a certain application or process or business unit be offline before SLAs are impacted, or the business itself from a revenue standpoint is interrupted? Having a really strong inventory of those with different metrics of each is very important to get a baseline for how you're going to build your business continuity plan or reevaluate it should you already have one. So with that, you're identifying essential services and functions. You're adding as much detail to this as possible, where those key stakeholders are existing, who would support those functions should something happen to them, who supports them, what vendors, contact information for all of those, pinpointing skill and staff requirements, whether or not you have those currently, you have contracts through them with outside vendors, or you need someone and you're identifying a weakness with that skill or staff requirement. And then at this point, you're flagging any potential issues with your plan, or you're writing your plan. And then you're identifying the recovery steps, which is going to look very different. A historical business continuity event, which was a disaster to one building or a disaster to a main office or something like that, is very different than the recovery steps we're going to start seeing now of how you're bringing workforces back in, how you're ensuring that you follow the local and national guidelines on this. I mean, the last thing you want to be doing is breaking some type of rule or law that's been put out there. So capturing all that data, like I said, we're across 5 different states with multiple municipalities in those areas. So making sure we're keeping up to date on what those dates look like, what those restrictions look like, whether or not that's having our customers in our offices or data centers, or having our employees coming back. Those are regularly brought up on our emergency response team meetings of how we're going to recover from these steps and bring things back to normal, how we're going to reintroduce employees back to the offices. And then, once we do return to normal and how you're keeping yourself up to date on the business continuity plan, it's like email phishing and social engineering, communicating and training employees. If you can ingrain this into them on a quarterly or annual basis of what the plan is, how it's going to be communicated, what their individual responsibilities are, those different types of things are incredibly important for this operating smoothly. And then reviewing your preparedness checklist, doing that as a global team, doing that with your functional areas is a key to success for seeing this plan continue on. And then on an annual or quarterly basis, just testing through different scenarios, testing with different functional areas to see that, do they need additional training? Do they know what their responsibilities are? Testing is very important on this. That's how you identify whether or not everyone knows what they're doing, or a plan has become stale, or whether it's still relevant for the different scenarios or risks that we're seeing out there. Making sure that you're testing so that you can adapt to new situations that are definitely out there, as we are with right now. And just, as you go through your risk committee meetings and those, if you've identified a new risk, if someone's brought up to the security or compliance team, whether or not there's a new threat out there, just having a quick working session to see how that relates to your business continuity plan and making sure it's staying relevant. So just a quick slide on where cloud comes into play. We're seeing a lot of discussions on this right now. We have a lot of customers asking us or talk in the industry of, should we be putting more into the cloud right now? A lot of that is companies are trying to find cost mitigation strategies. So their current critical infrastructure on site may be too expensive, or they're currently sitting in the cloud and it's too expensive. We're all going through tough times right now. So ensuring that you're cutting costs in the right areas while still staying secure and compliant is incredibly important. And so the discussions we're having with customers is, that first question, it depends. Should you be putting more into the cloud? Cloud native apps, absolutely. Whether they were built there and you're shifting to another provider, but it's those legacy on-site applications that were developed a long time ago aren't necessarily built to live in the cloud. Evaluating, it's not a one-size-fits-all for all of this. So if you're trying to mitigate costs, evaluate, take that list that you did through your business continuity plan of where all your applications sit, who's the process owners, and evaluate based on that. You've got an inventory on those. It shouldn't be what is the best scenario for all of our items? Should it go one or the other? It's really by an app or system-based approach to ensure that you have the right fit for the right piece. The cost containment during unpredictable times. There's a lot of different research out there on the public versus private versus hybrid. This is completely unique to each entity in business, depending on the amount of traffic that they have coming in, the amount of changes that they're making, or workload that they have. This is a very different conversation for everybody. So you just need to evaluate based on that. Is what are your key metrics to success on this? What's the most important things you're looking for? What do your workloads look like? What does a general month, week, year, what different types of things do those look like, in evaluating on that? And is it secure? Absolutely. Now there's the same type of controls that are put on you, whether or not you have your own data center on site or you're looking to push things to the cloud. There's specific controls that will fall on you. There's specific best practices that will fall on you. So ensuring that you're protecting yourself against cyber threats may look a little different, but there's still that onus on you to make sure you're taking the necessary steps to make sure your employee data, your customer data, or your processes are secure. And are there steps to mitigate these risks? Absolutely. Doing your due diligence annually and upon initial, selection of a vendor, and then making sure you're staying up to date on these different cloud requirements and security risks is incredibly important. And just a quick slide on us, how we can help. We provide general consulting to all of our customers at no charge for disaster recovery, compliant cloud, those different types of things. So we're just trying to help customers right now. If anyone has questions offline of this, specific to anything we presented or anything security and compliance focused, I'm absolutely happy to help on that front as well. We've got some different information related to our COVID response. If anyone needs assistance on that, we've been helping our customers put together business continuity plans, pandemic responses, and plans specific to COVID. And now we're seeing the shift of, assisting in how to bring the workforce back home. So if anyone has questions on that, I'm happy to help. So we're just here to help everybody and see everyone through this time. And I think with that, hopefully there's some questions, some comments to start a little bit of a discussion here. And if not, again, you guys can always hit me up offline.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I made a little bit of a mistake because I was so excited to hear what Michael had to say that I forgot to share what our Slido code is today. The code is 72871. Again, the code in Slido is 72871. We did have a few questions come through because I was able to get information out to a few folks. Michael, actually, this one came from me because, I worked with a guy who opened every email that came to him, even though he should not have. Are there specific phishing scams right now that we should be looking out for?
There absolutely are. And it depends on each user's kind of habits. So some of our users, based on where they go on the internet, things they've signed up for, definitely get far more or far less than some of our other users. But we're seeing a lot, and a lot of our customers, and even us internally, we're seeing a lot of emails, from the CEO type asking for some assistance specifically related to COVID. So those types are really big out there. The biggest is, especially early on in this, everyone was looking for information, whether it's nationally or internationally related to COVID. So we were making sure we kept an updated list of, websites and links that our employees could go to, because there was a lot of websites out there that may have had relevant data, but they had some very scary things tagged onto their websites that were pretty malicious. It wasn't their intention to put out there, but people were targeting those high traffic websites. So making sure that, our employees are going directly to the CDC website or their state website or the World Health Organization, it's those specific COVID from an email phishing standpoint that you just have to watch out for. So we had a lot of employees that their friend forwarded them a link to a website related to COVID. Our employee would forward it to our security team, who would run a scan on it and see that there was some malicious content in there. So educating our users on that. So that's a really good question, though.
Yeah, and there are a lot of small business owners out there who are reaching out to the SBA right now for the Paycheck Protection Program, for the EIDL loans. Are you seeing anything specific around the SBA?
Absolutely. So again, it's those, opportune targets where you're seeing they pivot pretty quickly to where they know there's going to be traffic, where there is traffic. So there are definitely phishing attempts specific to that people do need to be watching out for, and then making sure that they're going directly to the links for those government agencies instead of, searching for something or going through an article, those different types of things. Navigating directly to them is incredibly important to watch yourself on those.
That's great. So we've got a question here. My company doesn't have an IT team. How can we get information on what to be concerned about for downloading links? I'm thinking this is about when you were talking about Zoom booms and everything else.
Yep. So there's a lot of content out there, unfortunately. So whether that's working with a security third party that can help assist on that. There's the FBI puts out different bulletins on a daily basis. That's been good for our team to stay updated on those. Adding some email filtering if you are a small business, at least putting that in there, because those email filters are updated on a regular basis to watch out for some of the new scenarios. So it's those technical limitations that help protect your employees. Doing some of those are some easy best steps to protect yourself. Otherwise, I mean, it really is a full-time job staying up to date on these new threats, the different threat intelligence that we're getting, not only from like our internal security operations center, which is a third party, our own team who's full-time in this. It really is a full-time job staying up to date on these new threats, these bad actors, and the different scenarios they're pushing out there.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I was talking to somebody last week who mentioned that they were on a Zoom call with one of the local cities, and somebody Zoom boomed some very, very inappropriate content. And I think this was kind of early on in the whole situation. So, I think I would just suggest that whether you're using Starleaf, whether you're using Zoom or WebEx or Skype or any of those things, before you launch a meeting with everyone, whether it's just a small team from your company, or it's something like what we're doing here with Austin Technology Council, go through, take a look at how you can create the controls on who can enter the meeting and who can be seen and who can share their screen, just because you don't want something inappropriate coming up, especially if you're on a meeting with a client or if you've got several clients and you're trying to present information. So just spend a little bit of time researching that, and have your employees research that as well.
No, that's
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, that's a great point. And the two easiest ways to do that is putting a password on your meeting, even if it's one character. And then if you can, put a waiting room on there, because it's not necessarily feasible if there's a lot of people potentially like the meeting today. But if it's a smaller subset or a more important meeting, allowing those people to come in one by one from the waiting room with your approval can help protect yourselves there.
Yeah, and also making sure that not just anybody can share their screen.
Yes.
So we've got another question here. I have 3 children doing online education and our internet has slowed. How should I talk with my boss about changing my schedule? Because I think you were kind of talking about being understanding of employees having a lot going on, and 3 kids doing online school. That's quite a lot.
Absolutely. And that definitely depends on probably the role, whether you're more project-based and there's stuff you can do in off hours. Those are conversations we were definitely pushing to each of our managers and making sure open door policy is not the correct one right now, but making sure they were available to have discussions and being aware of what that work from home situation looked like, whether or not, they are at this point in time the teacher during those business hours. Making sure you're facilitating a conversation there and allowing, if possible, that employee to work different hours, rotating hours, and that depends on what your team makeup is and those different types of things. But being as flexible as possible is something we've been trying to communicate internally. So the first step is having that conversation, letting them know, because they may not be aware or thinking about that impact if that doesn't necessarily apply to them as well. So just bringing that up in a conversation, and hopefully they're receptive to facilitating some assistance there.
Good. So I've got another question here. The GDPR situation seems to be relaxed. How can I keep from getting the flush of emails? I'm guessing it's the same emails you and I are getting, which is, here's our COVID-19 response, and here's everything we're doing from people that you are or are not doing business with right now.
Yep. So, and you're seeing, so different regulatory bodies have kind of eased some of their restrictions in certain areas. HIPAA, specifically to the medical professionals, has kind of eased up on what they're doing. You're definitely seeing around the privacy sector as well. So GDPR, you're seeing a lot more communication out there. For some of our customers, we're seeing far more requests from users to remove their information at this point in time. But if applicable, making sure you've opted in or opted out of whatever it is they're capturing, or their different programs to make sure it remains anonymous. Having a good idea on, what data they are capturing on you and what you're allowed to do, either requesting them to get that inventory piece of it, or requesting that they remove you. Just knowing your rights at this point in time, depending on which side this question is coming from.
Yeah, and I think as a company, you should also be aware that if you're going to allow people the opportunity to opt in or opt out of emails and notifications, giving them options of what they want to opt in and opt out for. Because I know, for myself, there may be companies I'm getting emails from that I need the traditional emails that I'm getting from them, but I don't need a daily update on how the company is reacting to COVID-19. So, when I went to go do that, I was able to opt in and opt out of the emails I wanted and then did not want. So as companies, I think making sure that you're giving your clients and your prospective clients the opportunity to say, I want this email, but I don't want this one. I think that's a really important thing to do right now.
That's a great point.
So let's talk a little bit about VPN, because I think people know what it is and they know that they have access to it. But like you pointed out, exactly, there are a lot of employees who've never had to deal with it before. And there are even some small companies that just never even thought that it was something they needed to invest in. So can you talk a little bit about how a company right now can go about deploying that? Because I know of a few companies that actually are not currently using VPN and are wondering how to go about getting started with that and how to get that information out to employees.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So, you bring up a good point. The majority of our workforce sat in one of our facilities or offices. So they're on a secure wireless connection or wired directly to. The thought never crossed their mind of how should they be accessing their computer? How should they be accessing our programs? We had a small subset that was traveling heavily, and they were pretty educated on what they were doing here. But making sure your workforce knows that they should be using VPN, that they should have these secure connections to your corporate network. And then if you're an organization that may be smaller or hasn't gone through this process, there's providers that provide secure VPN connections at pretty reasonable costs that are really easy to stand up. Whether you're just surfing the internet and accessing web apps all day, that will still provide some security to you. So making sure you're using those. And if someone has some questions on those or some better products than others, those different types of things, I'm happy to answer those by email after the fact. But the cost to entry on these is really low. Setting up MFA on whether it's an internally developed app, that can be really expensive. Using MFA like on your bank or some of these web apps is usually really easy if you're using someone else's application because they've kind of already built it in. So you pick whether or not you're going to use Duo or a code push directly to your phone or Google's multi-factor authentication. Digging into some of the apps or third-party apps that you're using, usually that option is there. It's just something we haven't necessarily turned on. So if you're using QuickBooks or something like that, those functions are usually there if you're going through their website. So just researching a little bit on whether or not those exist and potentially enabling those to protect yourselves just a little bit more.
Yeah, that's great information. So you had also mentioned reaching out to employees, making sure that they're okay, making sure that they're doing well. And that's something that I try to do every single day, but I have a small team. So it's easy for me to check in with them. How are you doing? What are you working on? Did you make sure you got out in the middle of the day and at least took a walk and stretched your legs, sort of thing? But I think there are a lot of employers and a lot of managers out there who are struggling with how to actually engage with their employees, especially if they feel like employees maybe are not telling them how they're struggling, because there's this whole concern now of companies possibly having to furlough employees or lay employees off. And I think if I'm an employee, the last thing I want to do is tell my boss, especially if I'm concerned about possibly being part of that furlough or that unemployment aspect, that I might not be doing okay. And so from a company and a leadership perspective, how do you kind of reach out to your team and do that check-in and ask them how they're doing and get them to open up and talk to you about maybe some of the struggles they're facing?
No, that's an amazing question. And so there's a couple different things here. And it's So we've pushed this down. We have touch points on multiple different levels. So, our CEO touches our management team on a regular basis to give them updates, see how they're doing. Those managers are then empowered to reach out there to their teams. And that's really up to the manager to know that their employees that report to them, how best to communicate to them. Some don't necessarily like to video conference and show their face type thing. So being aware of each person's, nuances and how they like to communicate and providing them the right avenue of doing that, whether it's just through Skype via chat or, having a personal phone call or using the video conference. We're trying to empower our teams to have those conversations. But the biggest piece right now, and this is at all levels throughout our organization, is almost over communication. So giving them information to be privy to, provide comfort and transparency for where we are. So making sure that they have information on how we're sitting financially, if possible, whether that's good or bad, helps everybody work towards a common goal, keeps people from being surprised. So I know this isn't a one-size-fits-all for everybody, but trying to over-communicate when possible. We've generally seen that as a beneficial thing, that if you're transparent within your organization, people will, respond to that in a very positive way. Even if it's negative information, they kind of all band together, and you see some real team effort come out of it. So those are kind of the things that we're empowering our team and telling our customers, or giving them some guidance on how to deal with this.
And that's very helpful because I know, there are a lot of leaders who are worried about their employees out there, want to make sure that they're doing okay. But because we're not having those face-to-face conversations and we can't see each other and see body language and see how people are doing, it does become a bit more of a problem. So I liked your comment about making sure that you're making phone calls to employees because, the Slack and the Google Hangouts and everything else, it doesn't truly give you a way for finding out if people are doing all right. So let's talk a little bit because there was the governor had his announcement last Friday with his task force to reopen the state and the economy. A lot of companies put a lot of effort and a lot of investment to be able to get secure networks and to get employees, back home. And, just talking to some of our member companies and talking to some of the employees who work for our member companies over this past weekend, a lot of them are concerned about moving ahead too quickly and trying to get there. In fact, I've talked to a couple of member companies that said they're planning to continue work from home through the end of May. For companies that are looking to go back or dividing up teams and slowly start bringing people back from a security aspect and not just a network security aspect, but making employees feel secure. Do you have any suggestions of how they can go about doing that in a way that's going to be beneficial for the company and the employees?
Yep, that's a great question as well. And making sure you're not rushing back into things unless your organization isn't going to necessarily exist without rushing back. So if you're able to take a staged approach in ensuring that your customers and your employees are safe throughout this, and that you're also being aware of what that home situation is. You don't want to force your employee to have to come into the office if they don't have some kind of system in place to assist with their kids and those types of things. So getting information from each of our managers on what the work from home situation for our employees is so that we can build potentially a staged approach for coming back. So the people that do have kids at home that need to stay at home, maybe they're the ones that work from home for the next month or so. Ensuring that we have proper cleaning and sanitizing methods in use in all of our locations. We're still keeping some clean zones where no employees are going to go back into should there be an issue, so that we can, especially within our data centers, so we can move our operations directly over to those. But our approach at this point is not to rush back. It's to definitely take a staged approach and move those people who don't have maybe a good work from home setting where bandwidth issues are severely limiting what they can do, or they don't, they live in a small apartment in an office with a desk isn't, possible for them, giving them the opportunity to come back into the office, providing social distancing. So if we have a cube setting in one of our facilities that's too close, moving employees around to different scenarios, but ensuring a staged approach with a couple different teams, some staying home, some coming to the office, and just trying to think through some of the similar things we were doing when we talked about the social distancing before we sent everybody home, but applying some of those measures now as we slowly bring our workforce back in. And, we're very fortunate as an organization that we are doing well from a work remote standpoint. So allowing our teams to be pretty flexible in the future, I think, is something our organization's really going to be moving towards.
Well, and I think there's that whole sickness aspect that, I've been telling people since this whole thing came down that if there's an asymptomatic carrier out there, it's probably me with the number of people I come in contact with every week. So I've been taking the extra precautions, but I know that, ATC, we've instituted a sick leave policy that, you're going to get paid, just stay home and don't come in, don't share germs, don't do any of that. So I think that that's something that employers need to be on the lookout for, as well as is reviewing what your sick leave policy is and making sure that you're making it opportunities for employees who are under the weather to stay home. Because while I think a lot of us thought initially, I just have allergies or I just have the flu, we've got a lot of people testing positive in the Austin area for COVID-19. So let's make sure you're taking a look at those and evaluating whether you need to provide more opportunities for employees or change how you structure sick leave policy. It's just going to end up keeping your employees much safer in the long run.
No,
well, Michael and the group from LightEdge, this has been very informative, very helpful. I learned a lot today listening in on this. We will be looking at doing this program again to provide opportunities for more people to get involved and engaged with this. If you have any questions for the team at LightEdge, you can reach out to Austin Technology Council at info@austintechnologycouncil.org, and we will get you in touch with the right person from the team at LightEdge. Again, that email address is info@austintechnologycouncil.org. We are thrilled to have members like LightEdge providing information and content like this to help us all continue to move our businesses forward and keep everything growing. And as always, we are incredibly grateful to Starleaf for providing this platform for us and our members to be able to come together. We look forward to seeing you very soon. Please make sure you're using your masks when you're going out in public. And also, please make sure you're washing your hands and taking care of yourself the best that you can so we can see you very soon. Thank you so much. You all have a wonderful day.